In the picturesque town of Dunhill, where every street was lined with flowering dogwoods and homes boasted white picket fences, Daniel Whittaker and his wife Julia had crafted what appeared to be a picture-perfect life. Daniel was a respected architect, and Julia was an art teacher at the local high school. Their daughter Emily was a bright and sociable high school senior, and she was the center of their world. She often hosted her friends and boyfriend Michael at their home. Michael had won the family over with his charm and politeness. Emily was quickly becoming a fixture in their lives, but beneath the surface of this suburban bliss, secrets lingered. They were dark and unspoken, threatening to unravel Daniel's life. Daniel and Michael were having a secret gay affair. At first, it was just harmless exchanges, lingering looks, and playful banter that seemed innocent enough. But soon, Daniel and Michael's connection began to deepen. They were drawn to Michael's easygoing charm and unpredictable nature, which stood in stark contrast to Daniel's meticulous. Daniel found himself seeking out more opportunities to spend time with him. What started as casual hangouts slowly morphed into something neither of them could ignore. Their conversations grew more intimate, and their closeness was undeniable. Before long, their encounters crossed a line, turning physical as the magnetic pull between them became impossible to resist. Not only had Michael captured Emily's heart, but he had also earned Daniel's respect. His politeness and charm made him a frequent guest at the Whittaker home, where he was always eager to lend. As the harshness of winter gave way to the promise of spring, Emily found herself increasingly preoccupied with college applications and scholarship interviews. Her busy schedule often left Michael and Daniel to their own devices. It was during this time that Daniel enlisted Michael's help with a new project, a backyard shed that was meant to be a sanctuary from the impending quiet of Emily's departure for college. The project provided Daniel and Michael numerous afternoons together where they bonded over the intricacies of building something lasting from the ground up. They worked from the ground up, measuring, sawing, and hammering away. The work was physically demanding but fulfilling. It became customary for them to end the day sitting on the makeshift porch of the shed, sharing a couple of beers and talking about life. Michael, who had grown up without a father, found in Daniel a mentor who listened more than he spoke, who guided without pushing, and who shared a passion for craftsmanship. It was perhaps this admiration that slowly blurred the lines between them. One evening, a casual pat on the back, their relationship had crossed into dangerous, uncharted territory. Neither could pinpoint the exact moment the change occurred, but a complex tension began to build. A mix of confusion, denial, and an attraction that felt dangerously like desire had taken hold. Daniel was taken aback by the stirring of feelings he couldn't quite understand. He was a devoted husband and father, yet he found himself anticipating the weekends with a keenness that transcended the simple. As the shed neared completion, so did their unacknowledged truth. Their interactions became charged with an electric current, quick to smile, quick to touch, quick to step into each other's personal space. Their conversations drifted from mundane topics to personal dreams and fears. Daniel learned of Michael's insecurities about his future, his doubts about being good enough for Emily, and his deeper unspoken fears of abandonment. Julia, perceptive as ever, noticed the subtle changes. She saw the light in Daniel's eyes betrayed him when he spoke of their weekend plans. He seemed more present yet somehow distant when Michael was around. A silent question arose in her heart, one she was not yet ready to confront. She chose instead to watch, to wait, and to hope that her suspicions were unfounded. But as summer approached, bringing with it the end of Emily's high school journey and the beginning of something new, Daniel and Michael found themselves at a crossroads, standing in the nearly finished shed on one balmy evening. Surrounded by the scent of fresh wood and the waning sunlight, Daniel listened intently as Michael confessed, "I think I might be Michael's voice." Daniel looked at him and saw not just Emily's boyfriend or the helpful young man he'd come to know, but a person terrified of what his feelings might mean. "It's okay," Daniel said firmly. "It's okay to be unsure. Explore who you are." The relief in Michael's eyes was palpable. They crossed a line they could never return from as they stood there. The dusk cast long shadows around them. The shed they had built together was no longer just a structure in Daniel's backyard. It had become a symbol of their shared secret, a secret that once exposed could unravel the very fabric of their lives. But the story doesn't end there. In the heart, secrets have a way of surfacing, and the consequences can be more devastating than anyone could have imagined. Despite the project's completion, Daniel and Michael found reasons to spend time together as the days grew longer and the shadows of doubt deepened. The shed, once a hub of laughter and teamwork, transformed into a clandestine meeting place for Daniel and Michael. With the project officially completed, there was no real reason for them to continue their daily meetings. Yet they found themselves drawn back to that small structure at the edge of the garden was now a sanctuary for their growing connection. Inside the confines of the shed, surrounded by the tools and remnants of their work, their conversations deepened and their bond intensified. They were no longer discussing carpentry or college plans. They were confessing personal dreams, fears, and desires that they had previously dared not voice in the daylight. The space between them, once filled with casual banter, now pulsed with a more profound energy. On one such evening as twilight bathed the backyard in a soft glow, Michael paused at the threshold, the air thick with the scent of freshly cut wood. Daniel was already inside, pretending to organize tools that didn't need organizing. Michael stepped in, closing the door behind him. The click of the latch sounded final. "It's a beautiful evening," Michael remarked, his voice low and confident. Daniel nodded his head, his back to Michael as he fiddled with a can of varnish. "Yes, it is here," replied the Simplic. The conversation was straightforward, but the silence that followed was heavy with unspoken words. Michael moved closer, his steps slow and deliberate on the wooden floor. When he reached Daniel, he didn't stop or speak. He just stood there, close enough for Daniel to feel the warmth radiating from his body. It was Daniel who turned around. His hands were stained with varnish, and his eyes searched Michael's face for an indication of his thoughts. Without a word, Michael reached out, brushing against Daniel's shoulder. Daniel's touch sent a jolt through them both. It was the same electrifying contact that had crossed the line of their friendship weeks ago. Now, it was deeper, more deliberate. Daniel's breath hitched, and he met Michael's gaze. The air around them was thick with anticipation. The first kiss was hesitant, a mere whisper of lips that spoke of fear and longing. But as the initial shock of their boldness subsided, a second kiss followed. This one was firmer, more assured. They were no longer tentative. They were more than just a mentee and mentor. They were two individuals bound by a secret that grew heavier with each passing day. Their meetings became more frequent, each one a mix of guilt and exhilaration. They would talk, kiss, hold each other, and then part ways with a lingering touch, a promise of more. These moments, stolen in the quiet hours of early evening, became their refuge from the expectations and roles they played in the daylight. However, with each secret rendezvous, the risk of discovery loomed larger. They began taking precautions, checking for Julia or Emily's presence before slipping into the shed. They spoke in hushed tones, always listening for footsteps on the gravel path that led from the house. Daniel knew they were treading on dangerous ground. The intensity of his feelings for Michael scared him, not just because of their implications, but because of the potential hurt it could bring to their families. He found himself caught between his duty as a husband and father and the unexpected passion that Michael had ignited in him. Michael too felt the strain of the secrecy of their relationship. He was on him, clouding his thoughts and darkening his moments with Emily. He loved her in his way, but what he felt with Daniel was different. Confusing and overwhelmingly intense. It was a love that demanded more than he might be capable of giving without destroying everything else in his wake. As the summer heat intensified, so did the complexity of their situation. Each stolen moment, each kiss, each whispered promise added layers to their secret, making the inevitable reveal more dangerous and potentially devastating. They were building a house of cards on a foundation of silence. Both Daniel and Michael knew it was only a matter of time before everything came tumbling down. In the following days, Michael grappled with his burgeoning feelings and the confusion over his identity. He began to withdraw slightly, and his interactions with Emily strained. Emily, intuitive and sensitive, sensed the shift in Michael's demeanor. She questioned him, her voice tinged with concern. But his responses were evasive, always diverting back to the stress of impending college decisions and his uncertain future. On the other side, Julia watched her husband with mounting concern. Daniel had always been an open book, his joys and frustrations transparent in his expressive eyes. Now, however, there was a veil of secrecy and a distance that had crept into their conversations. He spent long hours in the shed, often just sitting on the porch lost in thought. Julia was certain that something fundamental in their relationship was amiss, and it was only the beginning. One afternoon, as the town prepared for the annual 4th of July celebration, Julia approached Daniel while he was sorting through tools in the shed and said, "Daniel, we need to talk." She felt a tremor inside, but her voice was steady. Daniel gave her a look that was a mix of resignation and defiance, confirming her fears that their conversation was long overdue. Julia pressed on, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "You seem distant and distracted. Is there something you need to tell me?" Daniel paused, his hands still, but the air between them felt charged. He felt charged, heavy with the weight of his secrets. "It's nothing, Julia. I'm just stressed with work and the changes coming up with Emily leaving for college." He lied, avoiding her gaze. Julia nodded, not convinced but reluctant to push further without more evidence. As the town's fireworks lit up the night sky, casting an eerie glow over the faces of the revelers, Emily pulled Michael aside into the shadows, away from the celebration's noise and light. Her eyes, usually so full of warmth and laughter, now mirrored his. The tension in the air was palpable, cast against the dark sky by the fireworks. "Michael," she began, her voice a mix of tenderness and resolve. Michael looked at her, noticing the serious furrow in her brow, an expression he wasn't accustomed to seeing aimed at him. "You've been different," she continued, her words careful but direct. "It's like I'm not even there when you look at me anymore. Are you having thoughts about us, about everything we've planned?" He was acutely aware of the guilt of his secret emotions, but seeing the worry etched on Emily's face added a new layer of pain. He took a deep breath, his mind racing for the right words. He had to say something that wouldn't hurt her, wouldn't betray the complex truth he was living. "It's not you," he said, his voice shaky despite his efforts to sound confident. "I've just been really stressed. College decisions. The future. It's a lot." Emily stepped closer, reaching out to touch his arm, her touch once a source of comfort now felt like a question mark hanging in the air between them. "Michael, you're pulling away from me. You're here, but you're not really with me. If there's something wrong, we can figure it out together. That's what we always said. We're a team, aren't we?" He wanted to confess everything to her. He wanted to tell her about the confusion that had taken root in his heart about the feelings for Daniel that he couldn't understand or control. But how could he explain something he barely understood himself without risking everything? "Emily, I promise you, you mean everything to me. Nothing has changed about how I feel for you. Dad, it's taken more out of me than I expected." Emily's gaze didn't waver. "Michael, if it's just the stress, why do I feel like you're hiding something from me? There's a difference in you that scares me. It's like I'm living with a stranger, not the person I thought I knew." The desperation in her voice struck a chord within him. Michael felt the facade he had been desperately clinging to start to crack. "Am I? I'm scared too. I'm scared of losing you. I'm scared of what these changes mean. I'm trying to figure out a lot about who I am. Please, just can we take things one day at a time? I need to sort through this mess in my head." Emily nodded slowly, the fear in her eyes softening slightly to make room for a cautious understanding. "I love you, Michael. I don't want to lose you, but I can't help you if you don't let me in. Whatever it is, we can face it together. Don't shut me out." The promise in her words was a lifeline, but Michael felt as if he were drowning. The weight of his secret was keeping him submerged. He nodded, pulling her into a hug, feeling her warmth against the cold fear inside him. "Thank you, Em. I'm going to try. I promise." Just give me a little time." As they stood there, the fireworks continued to burst above them, each explosion a stark contrast to the silent battle raging within Michael. A reminder of the turmoil that threatened to undo the life they had built together. Later that night, Daniel found himself standing next to Michael, their shoulders almost touching. The crackle and burst of colors above them mirrored the chaos of emotions Daniel felt inside. He knew he had to make a decision soon to confront the nature of his feelings and the repercussions they might bring. In the weeks that followed, the fabric of their 4 lives, Daniel, Julia, Emily, and Michael, became strained. Each thread was pulling toward a breaking point. Then, one August evening, the inevitable happened. Julia, unable to shake her suspicions, followed Daniel out to the shed. She pretended to be bringing him a drink. As Julia neared the shed, she heard the muffled voices of Daniel and Michael. They were weaving a thread of tension that she paused at the door, the shadows within partially revealing the 2 figures inside. Daniel's voice was low and tender, a sound Julia hadn't heard in years, even when he spoke to Michael. "We need to think about how we proceed from here," he said. "What we have has grown beyond what either of us expected. I can't just be your mentor or your friend anymore." Michael stood a few feet away. A conflicted expression etched across his young face, the dim light from the overhead bulb cast shadows that seemed to accentuate his inner turmoil. "I know, Danny. I came into your family's life as Emily's boyfriend, and now I don't know where I stand with anyone, not even with myself." Gently lift Michael's chin and force their eyes to meet. "Stand right here with me. We stand together in whatever comes next, but we have to be careful. We can't let this destroy the people we care about." Michael's eyes glistened with gratitude and fear. He confessed, "It's just that every time I think about ending this, about walking away, I can't." He didn't want to lose this, to lose you. "I'm terrified of what it means for Emily and your family." Daniel's hand lingered on Michael's face, the gesture tender but with the weight of their secret evident. "I'm terrified too," Daniel admitted, his composed facade cracking. "We've crossed a line. I never thought I'd approach it. We can't undo what's happened. Michael, we can only decide where we go from here." The air around them thickened as they considered the gravity of the situation. Their situation. Michael leaned into the warmth of Daniel's touch, seeking solace in the man who had become so much more than a father figure. "I wish we could just run away from it all," Michael murmured, his voice half desperate, half resigned. Daniel sighed, a sound that seemed to carry both regret and desire. "We can't just start over somewhere where no one knows us," he said. "We have responsibilities and commitments to our families." His voice hardened slightly. "This isn't a solution." Their predicament was settling in. "We can't be selfish. Not now. But hiding our feelings and being dishonest is a form of selfishness, too." Michael challenged, pulling away slightly to gauge Daniel's reaction. Daniel paused, the conflict evident in his expression. "Maybe it is, but think about the damage that the truth could do. It's not just about us. It's about Emily, Julia. It's about not tearing apart an entire family over something we still don't fully understand." "I understand," Michael nodded slowly, his heart heavy. "So what are we doing? Are we just supposed to pretend that nothing's changed? That we don't feel anything?" "Stop it, Daniel. We can't talk like that here, not now. It's too risky. Anyone could overhear." Then, suddenly, the sound of shattering glass pierced the night, slicing through their bubble of isolated conversation. They both froze, hearts racing as the harsh reality of their situation came crashing down. The door swung open, and Julia stood there, her face a mask of shock and devastation. The remnants of the glass she had dropped glittered ominously at her feet. Their secret, once confined to the shadows of unspoken words and stolen moments, was now laid bare under the unforgiving light of truth. As Julia's world and theirs began to unravel, the confrontation was swift and heartbreaking. Accusations and confessions spilled out under the harsh light of the shed's single bulb. Julia's pain was palpable. Her voice cracked as she demanded the truth. Daniel, overcome with guilt, admitted to the emotional affair. His words fell like blows upon the fragile structure of their family life. Michael, equally shattered, apologized to Julia. The gravity of their actions sinking in, he looked over at Emily, who stood behind her mother. Her expression was one of betrayal and confusion. And that's where all the real drama started. The following days were tumultuous. Daniel moved into the guest room, his relationship with Julia strained to its limits. Michael, racked with guilt, ended things with Emily. He was unable to reconcile his actions with the love he had professed for her. As the summer drew to a close, the tension reached a breaking point. Michael, desperate to find solace and unable to face Julia, ventured into the woods where he and Daniel had spent many afternoons lost in his turmoil. He didn't see the figure following him until it was too late. As the long shadows of the August evening stretched across the woods of Dunhill, the air was thick with tension. Julia was consumed by a tumultuous mix of fear and suspicion, trailing behind Daniel as he made his way into the dense thicket. Her hands trembled, clutching a flashlight that cast eerie shadows on the ground. Her heart pounded against her ribcage with each step. Daniel, unaware of being followed, moved with a purposeful stride towards a familiar clearing where he and Michael had agreed to meet. Michael, with his own turmoil boiling beneath a calm facade, waited anxiously. Ade waited anxiously, ready to confront the issues and find a resolution to the emotional chaos that had ensnared them all. As Julia approached the edge of the clearing, she stopped, concealed behind the brush. The voices of the two men floated towards her, their tones laced with a desperate intensity that sliced through the quiet woods. "Michael, we can't keep doing this. It's tearing us apart," Daniel's voice broke the silence. His words were heavy with emotion. "I know, Daniel, but I don't know how to." "Just stop feeling," Michael replied, his voice cracking. "What we have is real, isn't it? It's real to you, isn't it?" It is, but it's not just about us." Daniel's frustration was palpable. "There's Julia, Emily. I can't destroy our lives, our family." Julia strode into the clearing, her presence startling both men. The flashlight in her hand trembled violently, casting surreal patterns of light and shadow across the scene. "How could you?" she cried out. Daniel turned, shock registering on his face as he saw his wife. Julia began, but before she could explain, Michael interjected. "Julia, please understand. It wasn't supposed to happen like this." The tension in the air thickened, a tangible force that the situation intensified. Voices raised, accusations hurled. Daniel tried to calm the situation, reaching out towards Julia, but misinterpreted his gesture. Michael stepped forward, protective and defensive. The chaos that followed was a blur. Julia reacted instinctively. A flood of fear and desperation made her hand strike something hard against Michael's figure. It was a knife that had been forgotten in the confusion and carried by Daniel for cutting through the dense underbrush. Michael staggered back, looking disbelieving as he clutched his chest where the knife had struck. The woods fell silent, but for the sound of his labored breathing. Daniel froze, horror-stricken, as the reality of what had happened dawned on him. Julia dropped the flashlight. She lit the light, spinning away into the darkness. Her hands covered her mouth in horror. "What have I done?" she whispered. Her voice was lost amidst the rustling leaves. Moments later, Emily arrived at the clearing. She had followed her mother into the woods, drawn by a dreadful premonition. The sight that greeted her was a tableau of tragedy. Her father stood over Michael. Her mother was in shock. Michael was bleeding on the forest floor. Emily's voice filled with confusion and fear broke the silence. There was a heavy silence. She rushed to Michael, kneeling beside him. Her hands were trembling as she tried to stem the flow of blood. "Hold on, Michael," she said. "Please." Daniel was coming to his senses. He desperately dialed for emergency services. His voice was cracking as he spoke to the operator. Julia was standing frozen. Her mind was a whirlwind of guilt and disbelief. When the emergency responders arrived, it was too late. Michael's injuries were fatal. He succumbed to them. He was lying on the cold ground of the woods. That had once been a place of secret meetings. Meetings and hidden emotions in the aftermath of Michael's tragic death. The town of Dunhill found itself grappling with a sense of disbelief. How could such a grisly murder happen in the heart of their quiet, close-knit community? The Daniel Whittaker they had known, an esteemed architect, a loving husband and father, was now forever associated with a horrifying scandal. The trial that followed cast an unrelenting spotlight on the affair, forcing the townspeople to confront the darker side of the courtroom became a battleground of emotions. Daniel, now facing charges of manslaughter, appeared shattered. His life had unraveled in the blink of an eye. The public, once supportive, was divided. Some saw Daniel as a man who had made a terrible, impulsive mistake in a moment of panic and confusion. Others condemned him for the betrayal that had led to such a devastating end. Julia, standing by her husband despite everything, found herself at the center of public scrutiny. The weight of guilt and loss hung heavy on her. There was no doubt that Michael's death would haunt her forever. His life snuffed out not by malice but by a chain of decisions born out of fear and deceit. The woman who had once been Dunhill's beloved art teacher now found herself ostracized. Her reputation tainted by association. Emily, once full of life and the joy of her youth, was left with the deepest scars. She had lost everything. She had lost her boyfriend. Her father had been revealed to be a liar. She had to become a man she no longer recognized, and her mother was left grappling with her own turmoil. For Emily, the world had shattered that night in the woods. In the months that followed, she distanced herself from her parents, needing time to come to terms with not only Michael's death but the lies that had destroyed her family. The tragedy sent ripples through the community. What was once a storybook suburb became a place where whispers followed the Whittaker family. The house on Maple Street was sold within a year. The new owners were unaware of the dark history it held. The people of Dunhill were forced to reckon with the hidden cracks that run beneath the surface of even the most stable-looking lives. The truth always finds its way to the surface, often with devastating consequences. The story of Daniel Whittaker and Michael became a lasting warning. Secrets, no matter how carefully concealed, have the power to destroy lives.